Just as I post tier lists, we've got more class changes. So let's go over it real quick. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Starting it off, Mistweaver Blackout Kick damage been increased by 15%, Tiger Palm by 50%, and Spinning Crane Kick damage increased by 5%. Also, Phalanx Stomp's healing and damage has been increased by 150% instead of that 100% we saw previously. And Ancient Teachings can now stack up to 4 times. This is important because while in Phalanx Stomp, your Tiger Palm would be able to hit twice. And so now you can actually go 2 to 4 instead of going 2 to 3. Essence Font's now healing 5 targets, and its healing is increased by 40%, where they say that we're looking to heavily push Essence Font rotationally, but its total healing output has fallen further behind than is comfortable, and this may help Phalanx Stomp's initial heal feel more impactful. This really stands out to me as primarily being 5-man buffs for the spec, further increasing its output both whenever you're spinning to win, but also your single target damage, which was particularly weak for Mistweaver Monk. This is one thing I talked about in my tier list, and we're going to go over the tier lists as well. If you're tuning in and wondering what this means about the tier lists, we're going to go over it right after we go over the class changes under this one. So overall, these feel more like 5-man buffs than they are for rating more than anything else, but still going to be good for Mistweaver going into the next season. Holy Paladin has their healing reduced by 8% instead of the 5% that they were receiving before. Holy Prism's heal has been increased by 40%. Prism felt insanely weak after losing the Aberrus tier set. And Blessing of Sacrifice now splitting 20% of damage instead of 30%. I think this is actually one of the more heavy nerfs of all three, in fact, because it's a lot of the utility that Paladin is bringing to the table is the damage reduction that is granted to others going into 5-mans in particular. So having Sacrifice getting nerfed feels very, very heavy. Discipline Priest. Whew. They said we're doing another damage reduction pass. Gosh, I wonder who called that. To Sins of the Many. Gosh, I wonder who called that. As our previous change was not significant enough to bring Disc closer in line to other healers. Gosh, all right, you get the picture. This should bring him much closer to other healers while still retaining the ability to deal reasonably high damage as one of their strengths. This is exactly what I was talking about in my community post on YouTube, as well as some of my thoughts when it came down to the tier lists, was that they would nerf Sins of the Many, because the HPS benefit of this, particularly in raids, when you max out to like 20 atonements or you double radiance and hit 10 atonements, it reduces your damage. It scales with the number of atonements you have, to the point that Sins doesn't provide a massive amount of raid output. And so having Sins getting nerfed while Atonement getting buffed actually works out to be a good buff for raiding, but a little bit of a nerf more so for M+. So all in all, you can expect Disc's damage to overall be lower, but still really high in a raiding environment. In a key environment, it looks to be noticeably lower. It very likely will be when we go into testing this next weekend, be able to see for ourselves. But I would expect our HPS to get nerfed a little bit in a 5-man environment, but actually to be a bit stronger in a raid environment. I think that this is mostly fair, as Disc was doing very good healing when it came to keys and was bringing like good damage reduction and those resources. And so I don't think it's going to be too terribly big of a hit for an M+ environment, but it's only going to benefit the spec more in a raid. Moving on to Holy Priest, they finally fixed the bug where Sanctify was hitting 6 targets instead of 5. This has been going on throughout all of our PTR testing and, of course, misrepresenting how much healing you're doing overall. Symbol has gotten yet another nerf, reducing the cooldown of major defenses by 30 seconds instead of the 40, instead of the minute that it was previously. So this is massive, massive nerf to Symbol of Hope. And to top it all off, the proc rate of your 4 set giving you those additional holy words has been reduced by 10%. I think that these are very substantial HPS nerfs to Holy Priest, and it also makes it a lot more difficult to get your Holy Word Salvation back, which feeds into your answered prayers, which feeds into more holy words, and on it goes. So I believe in particular that Holy's output is now in a position where it really needs to have some attention being given to it, because if you're not casting all these additional holy words, you're losing the Aberrus tier set, which was giving you crazy amounts of Prayer of Mendings for free. Now I think it is going to be quite noticeable doing less HPS and having less raid utility being brought to the table. There's still a lot of cooldowns out there that are like a minute, minute and a half that Symbol would get value for, but it's going to be noticeably lessened going into the next raid tier. Resto Shaman, all healing increased by 3%. Yay, you know. And Amirjasil's tier set bonus increases the healing of Riptide by 25%. I think it was like 15% a couple weeks ago. And has a 6% chance to create a new Riptide instead of the 5%. These, I think, are going to be okay, but I think there's more like structural problems for Resto Shaman than anything else. And it would have to be like crushing Mistweaver or Preservation Evoker or like Spirit Link Totems. Utility would have to be really crazy valuable to be able to start outpacing others. That said, this was our tier list for Race to World First for the video I made like 2 days ago, all right? This is what it is currently. I believe with the changes that we have seen thus far, that I think it's very, very confident that you would be seeing Disc in the stackable environment for the Race to World First, because their damage is still going to be high, their output does get buffed, and that steady amount of like burst that you can sort of like chain together of having like one Disc ramp and then they have their downtime and the next is going to be ramping off of them, playing either Bender or Shadow Fiend builds. I think Bender, but we'll see. Would be quite good. You still will see Holy Priest in the Race to World First. If they get some HPS buffs, I think they could move back to the stackable range. But at the moment, Preservation and Mistweaver just crank huge amounts of healing. And I think Holy Priest would be one of those specs that you run for fights like Laradar or other encounters where the defensive or like the ramp value is not going to be as high for Disc. So you still want to have your Holy Priest in to get it the gear so that they're playing Disc on the later fights in the Race to World First. But keep in mind, that's going to be the Race to World First type environment. Holy Pally getting their HPS buffs feels kind of bad, but they're still at that point of giving Devo Aura. I still believe that you'd only really see Resto Druid if they're bringing Mark of the Wild. I think it'd be really difficult to see Resto Shaman in the Race to World First, just kind of in general. And Mistweaver, while they're getting some good damage buffs, they still aren't, I don't believe they're going to be playing anything other than like a Clouded Focus build in a raiding environment. And so those buffs are going to be adding some to their passive damage for the race, but not necessarily to their what makes their HPS profile super strong. For our Mythic Plus tier list, this is again what we had in our video I just posted today, of course, right? And as a result of Disc getting a bit of those HPS nerfs and of course the overall damage buffs, I think that there's some argument you could be making to like move around Disc within this still fits most groups kind of profile. I think Disc is still going to do a very large amount of damage just in general. And I believe that the Mind Soothe value and the Mass Dispel value, while it's occasional, it's not as present, is still going to be quite good. I don't actually think that this tier list is going to change up much at all from these changes. I think Mistweaver sort of like solidifies my position where previously I thought it was a bit of a hot take that I put in the video. Now I think it's going to be even more secure in that position since their damage is going up and the healing that they're doing from that damage is also going up, which will be very strong. Even though Holy Pally has yet again an HPS nerf, we saw in 10.1.5 when they received nerf after nerf to their damage, to their healing. I do think it's going to be significant to have Blessing of Sacrifice get nerfed, but nobody else really has that kind of cooldown offering that much damage reduction on that low of a cooldown, that consistently, and is also so tanky themselves. I think these are kind of like minor nerfs coming in for Holy Pally, but the things that make it really strong still continue to do so. Resto Shaman, again, getting their tier set buffed, getting their output buffed. These things help a little bit, but again, aren't overall changing the structure of what has kind of led them to be in trouble for a while. So those are the changes that we've seen. Once again, Resto Shaman getting some HPS buffs, Holy Priest getting hit with some HPS nerfs, as well as some utility nerfs, Disc receiving a buff for a raiding environment, for their output while losing damage for dungeons and raids, and probably a bit of an output loss for a dungeon environment. Holy Paladin getting some HPS and utility nerfs, and Mistweaver getting HPS buffs across the board, which are primarily affecting them in a dungeon environment. Overall, I'm not too surprised at all to see Disc getting those changes. I'm a little surprised to see Holy Pally's output getting nerfed down. I'm very surprised to see Holy Priest's output getting nerfed down, but I don't think that this massively upheavals a lot of the tier list stuff. I think it just becomes more likely that Disc is stacked in the Race to World First, because the damage is still going to be very high, certainly higher than we are seeing out of like the passive damage of like Resto Druid, certainly. And while like Preservation Evoker could be winning out by like the passive damage that it's bringing, I do think Disc is the most likely healer now to be stacked in the Race to World First. So I just got out of the shower, so I'm going to get myself a little bit more cleaned up and just post this video. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Be sure to subscribe for more updates and more regular content, as well as it does help us out a ton. Thanks for watching, guys.